strong.
Hi, this is Funny Minds, and I'm Lynn B., your host, and I'm with my co-host today, and
Edward Biss.
here we go.
Today's a really good day, especially for me being a guitarist. Our listeners and viewers are going to be excited because today we have Mr. Stephen Rosen with us, the author of Tone Chaser. How you doing, Stephen? Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to the show.
Guys. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much, man. Very, very excited to be here.
I was very
Excellent,
excited to find out all of the wonderful things and all the people. Oh my God, I have to ask you first. Were you ever with Jerry Garcia and the Dead? Did you ever meet them?
You picked the one person I was never with. I hate to say this. You're obviously a big Dead fan. They never quite did it for me. But I'll tell you a quick story. The Dead were on Warner Brothers. Well, we now know that Dead is this legendary band and people would follow them around and these cult figures. But I'll tell you, those first records on Warner Brothers, they couldn't give the band away. It was just not much interest. So literally every year the band would release a record, they'd call me. It goes, hey, do you want to interview Grateful Dead? Do you want to interview Jerry Garcia? And I go, well, no.
Look what you missed out on.
That was a big, big mistake, let me tell you.
Yes, it was, Steve. It was.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your book, Tone Chaser.
Yes.
Yeah. What can I tell you? What would you like to know?
Oh my God! Well, hey,
give us the whole
Eddie Van Halen.
On Eddie Van Halen. Yeah.
My God, what a big loss. I mean, obviously for Eddie fans out there, gone way too soon, just like a lot of other great guitarists like Jimi Hendrix and, the people that you're familiar with. And obviously your reach goes way beyond Eddie Van Halen, obviously, and we'll touch on that. But the newest book, Tone Chaser, which you wrote about Eddie, tell us a little bit about how that got started.
Yeah.
So it's June 1977. I'm at the Whiskey, the famous club on the Sunset
Strip. Yep.
Yeah, man. I'll tell you, the Sunset Strip back in the mid 70s was a pretty fun place to be, man.
I bet.
There's a lot going on. So yeah. I'm there on a Friday night. Cheap Trick is recording a live record.
Oh, I love them.
Not the Budokan record, of course. They would do that the next year and blow up. But in 77, they were still kind of a household name. And so the label kind of thought, well, let's do like a promotional record, live record recording at the Whiskey. So I'm there to see Cheap Trick record the live record. And I'm downstairs waiting for Cheap Trick to come on. And I'm there with my brother, Mick. And there's a tap on my shoulder. And I turn around and it's Michelle Meyer. Michelle booked the Whiskey. And she also booked some other clubs around town, most famously Madame Wong's East and Madame Wong's West, which were pretty hip clubs back in the day. Madame Wong's East was like one of the hip punk clubs. They had some really heavy punk bands playing there. And she booked my band, which had nothing to do with punk. Just out of the goodness of her heart, she never made me go through an audition. She booked my band into both clubs, and so I was forever grateful to her. So she taps him on the shoulder and says, listen, there's somebody upstairs you need to meet. So without asking any questions, if Michelle wanted me to meet somebody, this was somebody I had to meet because she had her finger on
You're
everything.
Like, sir, yes, sir.
Exactly. She knew everything that was worth knowing in Hollywood. So we go up the stairs to the Whiskey dressing rooms, and the Whiskey dressing rooms are like the bottom of ashtrays. They reek of cigarettes, and there's empty beer cups around.
Amongst other things, right.
Exactly. There's all this scrawl on the walls. In fact, I'll bet you there's some pretty famous scrawls on those walls. Because as we all know, everybody from Zeppelin to Alice Cooper to Chicago played there at one time or another. So I'm there. We walk in the dressing room, and I see this guy standing in a corner, kind of a, lanky guy, smoking a cigarette. And I could tell by his posture that he wasn't expecting company. It's not like Michelle had talked to him and said, hey, I'm going to bring somebody up. So, I noticed all that. And so we walk over, and you have to understand, this is 77. So there are no articles on Van Halen. There are no photos of Van Halen. There are no stories in Cream or Circus or any local papers. really the only photos that you saw were on those flyers that they famously put up on every street lamp, up and down Hollywood Boulevard. I do believe I recognized him. And here's another caveat. I never saw Van Halen play before meeting Edward the first time. So I didn't know how he played. All I knew was Edward Van Halen. I knew the name, of course. I knew Van Halen, the band. And I knew that this band had just signed a big deal on Warner Brothers Records. So going through my head, it's saying, the guy has to be a very good guitar player. It's got to be a very good band to score a deal on Warner's, right?
Sure.
So we walk over and she says, Steve Rosen, Eddie Van Halen, Godhead. And when Michelle used the term Godhead, that was her expression of, this is the God on the mountaintop. It doesn't get any better than this. He's the greatest who's ever lived, And Edward smiled at the compliment. Obviously, he had heard her say that before. So we start talking, and I don't know how it comes up, but the conversation rolls around to Eric Clapton. I was a monster Clapton fan. I mean, I love Cream. I love the Yardbirds. His earlier bands. He's done a bunch of these blues bands, And it turns out Edward was a huge Clapton fan. And so we just start talking about Clapton. And then Jeff Beck comes up, who's another one of my favorite guitar players.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just one of those conversations. And that was just, I describe it as a conversation that had started somewhere in the past, and you were just now continuing it. It was like this thread. There was no breaks. There was no awkward silences. So we talk. I can't remember if it was a half hour. It could have been an hour and a half. I can't remember that. But at a point in time, he runs out of the room. I'm thinking, where did he go? He comes back and he's got a pencil in his hand. And he picks up some grimy piece of paper from the floor. Maybe it was a ticket stub. And he's writing something. He hands it to me, and I see it's his phone number. I see it's a phone number. And he goes, yeah, man, I really like talking to you. Call me. And that was the first time I met Edward Van Halen.
Wow.
We became friends, I believe, in that moment. We were friends until 2003. In 1985, so we're now friends for about 8 years, I asked Edward, because by 85, right, the 1984 record had come out. I mean, he was arguably the biggest, the biggest band in the world, 1984. I mean, it was all of those things. So I knew that writers were going to approach him, that they're going to want to write his life story. So I thought, I'm going to ask him, So I built up the courage. It took me weeks and weeks to ask him that question. And I was scared. I really was. I was afraid that he was going to say yes, and I was afraid that he was going to say no. So,
oh, wow. Okay.
I say, Edward,
it's like those butterflies when you fall in love.
Exactly. I said, Edward, listen, man, writers are going to come after you. They're going to want to write your life story. I'd like to be the person to write the book. And I'm figuring he's going to take time. He's going to sleep on it, and Mr. Puffus goes, yeah, of course it would be you. Who else would it be?
Wow.
And for him to say that to me, you can imagine. It's like Picasso. It's like he wanted to become Picasso's, understudy, and he says, yeah, sure, Ed, go bring your pencils and paint it, So I started working on that book. I worked on that book for about 4 years. I had done interviews with Edward, but I needed to do more interviews with him for the book. I needed to get all the personal stuff. Ed, what was it like when you were growing up in the Netherlands? And when did you start smoking cigarettes? And what was the dynamic between you and your brother? And what was it like going to school there?
Right,
and your dad was a musician. And what kind of an impact did that have on you? And did your parents get along? All of that stuff that no one had ever asked him.
All the intimate intricacies of his life.
Exactly. Look, by then, 1985, everybody knew the guitars he played. They knew the albums. They knew his gear. That's not the kind of book I wanted to write,
Right.
I had done those interviews. I wanted to know Edward Van Halen, hence the title, Understanding Edward. So to make that part of the story a little shorter, I could never get him to sit down with me and do those interviews. He would always say to me, now's not the right time, man. If a book comes out on me now, people are going to think my career is over. I said, Edward, you're the only person on this planet who would think that way. But I couldn't dissuade him. And I pushed and I pulled pretty hard. And at a point in time, you have to back off because, it's like I didn't want to embarrass him or embarrass myself. We remained friends until 2003. the relationship ends for various reasons, and I don't want to give it away. You got to go read the book if you want to find out how it ends. So for 17 years, the book is running through my mind off and on. I mean, there were years that would go by that I wouldn't think about it or think about the relationship that ended. But in 2020, it just kind of all came back to me. I had a couple of buddies who kept poking me and said, hey, man, you should write the book. Hey, man, you should write the book. And so many things went through my head. One, so much time had passed. I thought, how do I even remember all that stuff that went on? You know, that was my first thought. Secondly, I thought, you know what? I don't think I'm capable of writing that book. As a journalist, as a person observing this cultural icon, I didn't think that I wasn't, to take a phrase from Wayne's World, I wasn't worthy of it. Mm-hmm. I honestly didn't believe I could do it justice. Mm-hmm. I tried to put those things aside, and I thought, you know what, I have to sit down and at least try, at least for my own sake of mind. It was now burning in my skull. I thought, I have to try this. My cat would wake me up at 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. because he was hungry. So I would wake up, go downstairs, feed him his cat food, and then try to go back to sleep. Sometimes I could, sometimes I tossed and turned. And he did this every night for weeks. At one point in time, I say, you know what? I'm not going to try to go back to sleep. Let me go into the computer room and let me see if I can write something. And I remember the day specifically, and maybe that's why I chose that day. It was August 24th, 2020, my birthday. I go in there and I sit down, and in my mind, it's like, okay, this is a beginning idea for a book. I didn't know where it was going to go, what I was going to come up with. So I'm sitting there pounding on the keys, and I sit back and I read it, and I go, that's not bad. That's pretty good. And that became the opening paragraph from the intro. And I really felt that I captured something there. A writer will talk about, finding the right voice, And at first I thought, I was going to write it in third person, but then it got so convoluted. Well, it's third person, but I'm writing about me back in 1982, and the tenses get.
You really can't do the third person. Yeah.
I couldn't do it, And I thought, well, somebody suggested, well, man, you were there, write it in first person. And I go, okay, I know that Steve Rosen guy. I could do that. I know what he would say. And honestly, that kind of opened the door. And I think about, I don't know, 4 or 5 or maybe a week later, I had the intro, and the intro was very long for an intro for a book. And my first instinct was, this is way too long for an intro. Typically, intros for like music books are 2 or 3 pages. Mine was like, I don't know, 12 or 15 pages. But at that point, I thought, you know what? I thought, this is my book. I'm going to write it. And if nobody reads it, okay, I'm going to write it to say I wrote it. And the book turned out to be 580 pages. Wow. And books aren't supposed to be that long. Music bios are about half that length. And in really a nutshell, that's how that book came to be. And I finished the book. Oh, and let me backtrack really quickly. So I begin the book August 24th, 2020, October 27th, Edward passes away.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, oh my God, what do I do now? Because in my mind, I was going to write the book, finish the book, try to reconnect with him and say, Edward, I wrote the book, and the scenarios and, running through the field and embracing and,
yeah.
Passes away. So I've got to
I'm
think,
picturing
what
the scenario, yeah.
Right, exactly. Do I stop writing? But by then I probably written a couple chapters and it felt really good. I kept writing, finished the book in September 21. So the book took me 14 months to write. I had written 7 books previously, and the longest any of those books had taken to write was like 3 or 4 months. Granted, they were much shorter books.
Right,
but just the mindset of writing this book, it was challenging. And then I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to go find a publisher. Made a couple calls. To my chagrin and shock and dismay, there wasn't interest. And I thought, how can there not be interest in this book from a writer?
Yeah, really.
The writing notwithstanding, but a writer who had a friendship with Edward Van Halen that no other writer ever had. Wouldn't you want to read a chapter? When they heard there was 580 pages, the first thing they said was, oh, we're going to have to cut it in half, not having read a word. So I thought, fuck it. Hope I can cuss on here.
Yeah.
I reached out to my friend.
Oh, you're forgiven.
I reached out to my friend Niels Lozauer. Neil was Van Halen's photographer, official photographer in the early days. Neil shot all those amazing pictures on the second album with Dave jumping.
Yep.
Neil had put out several picture books, and they were on big publishing imprints. So I thought, well, maybe he knows a publisher. So Niels Lozauer is the loudest, and I say this with all loving care, the most obnoxious person you ever want to meet. But he is a character of this world. I've been his friend since 1974, and most of the time I think he hates me, and he never even wants to talk to me. So I call him, I go, Neil, listen, man, I finished my book, and I was looking for a publisher. Don't be a fucking idiot. You're not going to find a publisher. You're not going to make any money. Are you a moron? What's wrong with you? I self-published my book, and it was the best thing I ever did. Do I have to yell at you? How stupid are you? all with love, right? And
right.
So I went out there and I looked at a lot of publishers here in America, and what I wanted was somebody ideally who knew who Van Halen was. Look, it wasn't important. Obviously, they published books on subjects that they had no idea about. Publishing a book is publishing a book. For me, I wanted that extra step. I couldn't find anybody. I finally find a guy who's a monster Van Halen fan. We connect immediately. We start the process. Something happens with this guy. I don't know what it is, and I will not mention his name.
Okay.
He was arrested for drugs. He was an alcoholic.
Okay.
I cannot even begin to go into it. So I'm back at point zero. I meet a guy, Greg Trupiano. I can't remember where I met Greg. And I reach out, and he knows Van Halen. He goes, listen, I've been dealing with a Chinese publisher for 15 years. These guys are remarkable. I didn't want to use a Chinese publisher for no other reason than I just wanted the book printed over here. I thought I'd have more control. It's in China. Right. It's sight unseen. I have no hands-on. I can't see it,
And a lot of times they like to steal all your stuff and do it themselves.
That's what I thought. I thought, my God, I'm going to
little
see
Chinamen.
tone speaker in Chinese and in Shanghai.
See a little Chinese Van Halen come out with a car.
Exactly. So I voiced my concerns to Greg. He says, these guys have been in business for like 25 years. They're amazing. I find an art director. We put it together. I send it to Greg. He sends them all the files. I don't know what it is. 2 or 3 weeks later, they send me like a test pressing of it. It is incredible. Their attention to detail. They write back questions. Oh, did you meant not so much editing things, but just minute little details that they caught, that they fixed. That first edition came out with Neil's amazing photo on the cover. Neil provided the photos for all 3 covers. Through the goodness of his heart, that's who this guy is. Screams at me at the top of his lungs and then gives me these photos. And so, yes, this company in China were remarkable. They just did the 3rd edition, which came out in March. And that was sort of the saga of Tone
So
Station.
you didn't get any endorsements from anyone from Van Halen's camp except for the photographer? Like any of the people in the band or anything like that? Did you get any endorsements from them?
No, I did not. I haven't spoken to any of those people.
Really?
Since 2003. And those people are typically, mainly it's Alex Van Halen, Edward's brother, of course.
Right.
And Wolf, his son. Valerie Bertinelli probably had some participation in that. Perhaps Janie, his second wife.
Right.
I'm not sure about that. But no, I haven't had any endorsements or heard a single word from any of them.
Not even in review of your book or anything, like give you any kind of compliments or something on what you wrote for him? Nothing?
From the Van Halen people?
Yeah. No. Oh, wow.
Let me ask you this, Stephen, when you were, when you were with Eddie for all those years, did you have a relationship with Alex at all? Or was it strictly pretty much just Eddie?
That's an excellent question. We got along famously. You know, Al was the big brother. You know, he was the older brother, and physically he was a bigger guy. Al was a really big. And whenever the two of them were around, you knew that Al had his eye on Edward. I mean, he loved him and he protected him. I think that Al sensed early on that my relationship with Edward wasn't, you know, oh, Rosen's just his writer and he's just trying to get Ed to sit down for interviews all the time. Or what does he want from my brother? You know, does he want guitars? Does he want to borrow money? I mean, I don't know. But whatever it was, Al felt safe in his own head when I was around Edward. So we got along great. You know, I didn't see him that often. Al only lived literally 5 minutes away from Edward. Edward lived in Valerie's house in Coldwater Canyon, and Al lived in a little complex called, it was called Summit Village, which is just very nice private development up on Mulholland. Mulholland's a very famous street. Going along from the valley to Hollywood. And so he'd be over there once in a while. They'd just be hanging out. Maybe they'd been working on music. So if I'd see him, it was always, hey, man, how you doing? We'd shake, you know, and it was great. And in fact, in one of the chapters I write, in fact, it's called You Can Call Me Al. And in parentheses, it's EX, Alex, as a nod to the Paul Simon song.
Right.
And I was up at Edward's, and he says, "Hey man, you wanna go out?" And I remember exact words, but it was mainly he said, "You want to go out on a double date?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Yeah, well, I'll ask out this girl I'm seeing, and you bring a girl along." So we went out on a double date. We went to like this Indian restaurant, you know, where you sit down and you kind of share the big glass. And it was unbelievable. And then afterwards, and I write about this in more detail in the book, I mean, it was an amazing night. And afterwards, we drove west down Sunset Boulevard to Westwood, which is where UCLA, the famous university, was, to a place called the Westwood Hotel, very expensive, she hotel, you know. And he got like a room for he and his girlfriend and he and this girl that I was seeing. And we spent the night, and then we woke up, you know, and had breakfast. And look, being with Alex, I mean, I never, ever, and this is the truth, I never intended for him to pay for everything. Just being there with him was so cool. So, man, so we're at dinner, you know, and the bill comes, and everybody there, this girl that I was seeing was a freaking lush head. I didn't drink. I didn't like the taste of alcohol, and it would give me like a migraine headache. But my God, she would drink and she would drink, literally to the point where the waiter had to use like one of those little plastic like computer clickers to like rotating the numbers because he couldn't keep them in his head.
Oh
but
my
Alex
God.
and his girlfriend, I'm telling you, man, between the meals, I don't know, $300, $400. Now you have to understand, this is back in the mid '80s. So that's that's an expensive meal. And then the hotels, I know these rooms are $200 a night, $300 a night, even then. But the point being, I meant to, you know, reach for my wallet, both after the dinner and when we were checking out the hotel. And he just kind of looked at me, you know, and just kind of shook his head in the coolest, most casual, most respectful way. Because he could have said something. He could have made a scene. You know what I mean? I'm walking on eggshells being around him, and I'm with a girl, you know. He was just so, and I never forgot that. He was so cool about it. What was kind of interesting was after the dinner, Alex drove. So we got in his car. So he's now driving, and I know that he's totally fucked up. He's driving down Sunset Boulevard, which isn't the greatest street to drive on if you're drunk. But, you know, I thought, hey, you know what? If I'm going to go, what better way to go than in a drunken car crash with Alex Van Halen, right? I mean,
really, honestly.
I can be funny about it now. But no, we got along really well. Then some things happened that were absolutely unintentional. I don't want to give it away, but I quoted him. It was, in my mind, so innocuous Later, Ed would tell me, "Oh man, Alex is really pissed that you printed that."
Uh,
By this time, I had known Edward for years and years and years and years. He had told me stuff. Had I printed one word of that, there would have been major repercussions, because he was telling me stuff in real time. He was talking about the band in 1984, when the band should have been, firing on all chambers, the band getting along. Well, it wasn't shortly thereafter that David Lee Roth leaves the band. He had been telling me about his relationship with Dave. This goes back to after the first record. I mean, had I printed any of that stuff,
yes,
he wanted to quit. Edward wanted to quit the band. I mean, as early as the first.
Wow.
If I had printed that stuff back then, Warner Brothers would have flipped out. I mean, who knows what?
God, yeah.
Right, right. Oh, yeah, they protected him very well, I think.
That's their investment.
So
that was a big investment. He was crazy as heck, but he was a big investment.
Huge. But I never uttered one word of that. I kept all of that in my private archives, and yet, it's like you live in a glass house and you throw a stone one time, and the whole fucking house comes down.
Right,
and that's honestly that's what it was, and everything I had done up to then, or my friendship with Alex, with Edward,
right out the window. Yeah.
Wow.
So,
wow.
It was a shame.
Well, let me ask you, how did you actually start getting into interviewing all these pop stars? I mean, you really interviewed the best of the best, not just Van Halen, but the best of the best. How did you get into that position to begin with?
I love that question, because there's so many things that sort of came together, and I can remember those moments so well. You do anything for a period of time, and I hate to be glib about it, but if you're a junkie, nothing feels like the first time you get high, right? And you're always chasing after that. Well, as a journalist, it was sort of like that. Not quite like that, but so I loved listening to music. I was always listening to records when I was 10 and 11 years old. I remember listening to like Louie and the Jolly Good Giant, and I loved the Seeds. Oh my God, the Beach Boys. I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in Culver City. They were from Hawthorne, so they lived. They were like 25 minutes away. I wanted to be a surfer, though I couldn't swim. I heard all of those songs, and so I loved music. I was a big reader. I mean,
Stephen had a big afro too.
I did.
Dude, he had a Hendrix afro. It was badass.
I did.
It was so badass.
I was reading magazines. I'd read like these surf magazines and like cartoons, like animation cartoon magazines, like Murph the Surf. And then I was reading books in school. I when I learned how to read, I can remember that moment. You're looking at the words, and it's like chapter 4, the second, and I can remember that realization. I can also remember learning how to write, and you print, and you had to go above the cursive, and I can remember the moment when I could put words in it. My God, those moments are fixing. So I loved listening to music. I loved reading. I started playing guitar at an early age. I was reading music magazines, and I was reading stuff. I remember it was an issue of Guitar Player magazine. And I remember reading that and going, you know what? I can do that. I know enough about guitars and guitar players. I could do that. So I started writing for my high school newspaper as a senior, 1971, and I had a music column. And I thought I was so hip. I had the logo from Woodstock with the dove sitting on the guitar neck. I thought, I am so hip. And what I did was I sent out letters to all of these club owners saying, hey, if you'll allow me to come and review your show, I'll print a review, and 1,700 people at the Culver City High School and junior high will read that review, and I bet some people will come to your shows. I got responses from Mario and Elmer at the Whiskey, from the Troubadour, a club called the Golden Bear that was down in Huntington Beach, which was south of where I lived. A club called the Ice House in Pasadena, which turned out was like literally 10 minutes from where Edward grew up in Pasadena. And I would go and I would review these shows. It was the most amazing thing. I thought, my God, I am not only getting into these shows for free, they're giving me front row seats at these clubs. The Ice House used to feed me. They go, "Hey, what would you like, sir?" They have like steak sandwiches, hamburgers, and fries. I was on tabs everywhere I went. I could drink all I wanted, though I didn't drink. So I'd order coffee and Sprite.
Yeah.
I thought, this is pretty cool. But maybe the most amazing part of it, the next day after that little story came out in the Culver City Centurion, the little school newspaper, people who never even knew I was alive, girls who wouldn't have talked to me had I paid them, would walk up to me and say, "Hey, I saw that review you did from Spirit. That was really cool." That was it. Guys don't get into rock and roll because of the girls. Don't believe a word of it. Money comes and goes, man. But having girls.
Stephen, do not give away the secrets.
There you go.
I told my wife the opposite.
There you go. So I'm writing for my high school newspaper. I'm getting a small taste. I start sending out reviews to various little local papers. I had something printed in the LA Star, which is like a softcore porn paper. And I call it that because one of those newspapers, you open it up to look at the massage ads in the very back. Nobody was buying the LA Star to read my stories on musicians. But you use that as kind of exactly. You use that as kind of a stepping stone. I got something printed in the LA Free Press, which is a very, very hip underground newspaper. And then I think I got something printed in Cream and Circus, which were amazing magazines at the time. In '73, the doors opened for me by a girl named Lydia Woltag at a company called Gibson and Stromberg. She makes a call to the editor at Guitar Player magazine. "Hi, we have a new writer here, Steve Rosen, and he's going to be interviewing Jeff Beck. Would you be interested in his story?" She comes on the phone. She goes, "Yeah, Jim Crockett, the editor, will read your story. And if he likes it, he'll use it." So one of the first interviews I did is with Jeff Beck. I mean, I can't even tell you. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you. I saw Jeff Beck at the Shrine.
That's weird. That's totally.
I mean, I would have paid the magazine to have gone and sit in a room. So I do the interview. God, there's so many anecdotal moments here. I can't leave these out. I'm interviewing him. It's going amazingly. I'm trying not to geek out over the guy. I get to the end of the cassette. I rewind just a little bit just to make sure that the level is okay. And there's nothing. There's silence. I go, "Oh, I didn't rewind enough." I rewind again. There's silence. He's watching this process. I did not hit record.
No.
I hit play.
Oh,
God. He's looking at this and I'm thinking, enjoy it while you can, Steve, because your career is over, pal. Guitar Player wouldn't hire you again if you paid them. I didn't even know what to say to him. He says, "Look, it's okay. Let's just continue from here. You can come back tomorrow." I couldn't have written this scenario. We go through it. I come back tomorrow. I bring my guitar. I had a '67 all maple Strat that was beautiful.
Oh,
He's playing the guitar. You can hear him playing it on tape. He goes, "I really like this." I'll tell you, man, I was about 3 seconds away from just giving him the guitar. So my career grows from there. As a writer for Guitar Player, all those doors get open, Lynn. You're talking about all these amazing people I met. John McLaughlin and Joe Walsh and Rory Gallagher, David Gilmour, John Entwistle, Paul Kossoff, Robin Trower, Ronnie Wood. I mean, that's just guitar world, And then I'm doing all these other interviews for, Cream and Circus, Musician Magazine, Zoo World, all these magazines that are now long gone.
Right.
It was just, it's kind of like once you're in there and you've got some credentials, you're on these lists, right? You're on the list for the record companies. You're now receiving all these new record releases. You're getting all the T-shirts and the tickets to the concerts. They're flying you around because, Loggins and Mesita is not coming to California, but they're going to be in Colorado, so we want you to interview them for the free press. We'll fly you to Colorado.
Oh, wow. That's wonderful.
And spend enough money. I mean, I was able to travel to Japan. I went to Japan twice.
Oh,
I was
nice.
going to Canada, all over the U.S.,
Right.
Mexico. It was just amazing, you know. And
Yeah, you've had an amazing life. So far you've had an amazing life.
I had a pretty amazing life.
Yes.
It was the combination. I mean, I really did work really hard at it, you know.
Right.
Until I had an article published. I mean, I have rejection slips, and I kept them all from Cream and Circus and Rolling Stone and Guitar Player, you know, and I framed them on a wall, you know, and all those magazines. Ultimately, I wrote for, you know, but youth is obstinate and stupid, and you think, well, they said no, okay, I'll go out and I'll do another review, you know, and thank God for the youth. You know, if we,
Absolutely.
you know, if we were born
Yeah.
being, you know, 30 years old, man, no one would ever do anything, because by then, you know, it's a little tough, right? You know, you get kicked around a little bit, but yeah,
That's true.
I was
That is
lucky.
true.
So hard
What is
work.
what's next on the docket for you, Steve?
Well, actually, on this past July 1st, I released an audiobook version of Tone Chaser.
Oh,
okay.
good.
Excellent.
Good.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it is pretty amazing. So,
Hey, I seen a killer endorsement from Joe Satriani that I posted for your book. He gave you a big
Thank you
shout
so much.
out. Yeah, that was awesome.
That's
because
awesome.
and
Yeah.
just to let you know, Joe Satriani is playing with basically
Sammy Hagar.
Sammy Hagar version of Van Halen.
Yeah.
He's, you know, they're doing
okay.
so, and Joe is obviously a massive world-renowned guitarist and a big lover of Eddie Van Halen, and gave Steven a big shout out to his Tone Chaser book, and
Wow.
I posted, it was fantastic. That's
Well,
a big kudos, man.
Van Halen was always someone that you really aspired as a guitarist.
Yeah, well, you know, I started, Steve, when I started playing when I was 6. So by the time I was, you know, I'm old like you. I'm 56.
That's not old.
That's not
It's
old.
old. But
Right.
it's all, when you cough and you throw your back out, you're old. But you know, once I hit about, I started at 6. Once I hit about 10 or 11 was when Eddie kicked in. And I mean, you know, you go, Jimi Hendrix was my original.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get into Jimmy Page. Then it morphed into Brian May, Eric Schultz from Boston, and Kiss. And then it went right into Van Halen. And then from Van Halen, it's over. You know, like once you hear Van Halen, especially at that age, it was magic. When I got to see Van Halen on their Diver Down tour in New Jersey. And I remember the feeling like I couldn't believe I was in the same building as Eddie Van Halen. in my head, that's what I was thinking. I'm in the same building as Eddie Van Halen. And they came out and they did not disappoint.
And Steve actually sat with him. So, I mean, like, you know.
And Steve was probably there.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I wasn't at that show, but I did see quite a few. You know what happens, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, and I sort of touched on it before about you're sort of always chasing that high. I mean, look, I was meeting one remarkable person after another, so that analogy probably wasn't correct. But it becomes correct after I've been writing. You know, I mean, I literally wrote for just about 50 years, and I would say the last 10 years, I mean, I was still meeting remarkable people, but the style of music I was listening to, that music had changed way earlier. You know, so it's more that metal thing. You know, and there are a lot of amazing guitar players, but the music just didn't mean as much to me. But in sort of following up your comment, Edward, I saw a lot of concerts back in the day. You know, I mean, I was at the clubs once or twice a week, and I was probably seeing concerts once or twice a week. I mean, a lot of concerts, you know, my brother and I would go to. I mean, amazing concerts. So what happens is, blasé isn't the right word, but it's sometimes they kind of run into each other a little bit, and I hate to say that, you know. And I saw Van Halen a fair amount of times. It's hard for me to pinpoint like some of those memories of those shows the way that you can. It's just one of the side effects of kind of being at concerts all the time. I mean, there's other things that I remember distinctly, you know, sitting with him and he's playing his guitar, or being up at 5150. Those moments I can remember because I can hear those moments on tape and talking. But some of those other things. So yeah, so your response, you know, people have seen them, you know, multiple times who maybe haven't gone to a lot of other concerts, or Van Halen is their favorite band. And I'm not saying that Van Halen was not one of my favorite bands, but I had a lot of favorite bands, you know. So it's just a different experience. But I know that what you were saying and that bigger than life thing. And look, I think, and I tried to answer the question, what was it about Edward that transcended all of those other guitar players that were his contemporaries? And you're talking about some extraordinarily great,
very heavy hitters, very heavy hitters.
Warren DeMartini.
Oh, Warren, Jakey Lee, and George Lynch, and you know,
George Lynch.
Yeah.
George Lynch was one of my favorites. I mean, of all time. I mean, I love George.
Amazing guitar player. So what is it? Were there songs better than Dokken songs, or you know, those are?
Was it his personality? Could it have been his personality as opposed to other people?
That's what I think it was. I think it goes deeper than the personality. I think it goes to just, I mean, how do you define charisma? It's just the heart and soul of the guy. So yeah, what you experienced was, yes, this monstrous physical production you were seeing with the big amps and the stage and him running around and the guitars and the smile. But you were connecting with that guy on this personal level that somehow these other guys did not have it. I'm not saying that they didn't have it. It wasn't happening all the time with every, you know what I mean? There was something special about Edward. And like I said, I had been around a lot of those heavy guys. I was in a room. I was on the road with Zeppelin for 11 days. And I spent a fair amount of time with Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones. And I was there with Jeff Beck.
That's incredible.
2 more times. And I interviewed Brian May twice. And, you know, these other giants, I mean, Paul Kossoff and Robin Trower, I mean, guitar players that I adored. I thought they were.
Steve Lukather.
Steve Lukather spent a lot of time with and George Lynch.
Well, he was a big, Steve was a big fan and friend of Eddie's as well.
Huge fan. Very close friend. And yes, all of these guys have something, but with Edward, I don't know. I don't know how to.
He was one of those guys that when you heard him play, he was so far apart, you know, in so many different ways. Not just the sound, but his style, his choice of notes, his way of thinking. You know, the way he wrote. It was a combination of things. I think that really.
And it didn't hurt that he was so sexy, so, you know.
But the first time you heard, I remember being in high school, and the first time I heard Eruption, and I remember my buddy cranking it in his car on a, you know, cassette, you know, he had a jacked up cassette player. Yeah. And we must have listened to that 25 times in a row on 100, you know. And this is back in the day. We didn't give a shit about if the neighbors heard it or, you know, we wanted you to hear it. We were like so blown away by this. They're like, everybody needs to hear this shit. And when you hear Eruption, that's Eddie Van Halen, you know, and that's where he goes, woo, you know. That's remarkable, man.
That's great.
That is really remarkable.
Well, Steve, tell all the fans where they can find you, and where, you know, is your book selling on Amazon, Kindle? You know, like, you know, where can they find you?
Steve, one last question. Are you going to do a book with P. Diddy next?
I'm thinking about it.
Really?
No.
Steve's been to a couple freak offs out there in LA.
Okay.
No, Steve, where can the fans find you?
Yes.
Yeah, man. So you can find me on my website, which is very simple, tonechaserbook.com. One word, tonechaserbook.com. You can find Tone Chaser on Amazon, Reverb, eBay, and Etsy.
Okay.
So if you're looking for a homemade purse, you can go check out Etsy and put my book in it. And you can find the audiobook on a site called mysoundwise, one word, SOUNDWISE.com, mysoundwise.com. And if you've already purchased the hardback, I'll give you a thank you price on the audiobook. And just real quickly, the audiobook is 30 hours long, and I do the main narration. But what makes it so extraordinarily unique and special, I think, is that I have embedded all of the original interviews I did with Edward back in the day. So you're going to hear all of those interviews, all of those private conversations.
Are you serious?
Oh, that's great.
Wow.
And there's actually moments of Edward playing that you'll just, I mean, there's not a lot of it, but anything. Yeah. And you're going to hear him noodling around on my guitar acoustically. You're going to hear him playing bass and me playing guitar when we jammed. True stories, right about that. So you're going to hear some of this stuff. You're going to hear Edward Van Halen moments after he just bought 2 Les Pauls, bring them to my house, plug into my Marshall stack, and crank it to 10. And you're going to hear about of the most amazing thing you've ever heard.
He didn't put it to 11?
Tried.
That is so
That's
awesome. So
funny.
that's unique only to the audio version.
Right.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Right.
That's fantastic.
Okay.
That's fantastic.
All right.
I'm excited
So
about that.
I mean, owning the audio version would be a really big plus. So you could do both. Get the audio version to have the extras and buy the book. Okay.
Yes.
So everybody do that. When you get the audio and then buy the book, and you have the whole.
And I want all the listeners and viewers to tattoo Tone Chaser as a tramp stamp above their butt.
And we'd like to hear, once you buy it and get it and listen and read it, get back to us on funnyminds.com, Lynn at Funny Minds, Edward at Funny Minds. Let us know how you liked it, and we'll let Stephen know. And let Stephen know himself.
And next time we have Stephen on to talk about his P. Diddy book, we're going to let him, he's going to take his hat off and unleash the fro.
The afro.
Is it still there? Did you shave it, Stephen? Where is it? Where'd it go?
It just went the way that all things go with age, right?
Yeah, right? Downhill. Well,
that was
Stephen,
back
it was a pleasure. It was an absolute pleasure to meet you, have you on. I was so excited. And when Eddie was talking about you, and it's really, and I love music, and I love all the people that you had the pleasure of being with. So it's been very exciting to meet you too. So to all my fans, I say to you, go to funnyminds.com, and, we have a store on there, and we have some new merchandise. We have new Funny Minds logos and some shirts and cups, and, there's
condoms.
There's no, we didn't get into that yet. And there's 2 organizations that we're really, really very happy to be aligned with, and that's St. Jude's Children's Hospital and breast cancer. So there's a big purple button on there, and if you have the ability to donate to those organizations, that would be wonderful. And I thank again all of my fans for being with us, and please subscribe to us on YouTube, because we're really pushing YouTube. YouTube is the best, and we love it. And again, Stephen, it's been wonderful. I love you, and I love what you've done and what you're doing. So everybody out there, be happy, be healthy, be wise, smile, and laugh, because we know that laughter is the best medicine.
Yep.
So I say goodbye now.
Go buy Tone Chaser.
Tone Chaser.
Stephen, thank you.
Thanks, guys.